Welcome back. This is The Drive Home. I'm Greg Seltz. You know, just in summary of what I was just talking with my wife about on Dinner Talk, I met a wonderful lady today, Anita Pambada. She also said something I think that is a theme for how we want to talk about what we're facing next with my next guest. But she said, I keep hearing about these secular statist folks as the new way forward. And she said, no, they're the old way backward. And I told her I was going to put that on the radio today and give her credit because I think she's absolutely right. My next guest, Yoey Suarez, is a writer, producer, and journalist exiled from Cuba due to his investigative reporting about themes like torture, political prisoners, government blacklists, cyber surveillance, freedom of expression and conscience. Sounds like issues we're dealing with here in America, and I am so privileged to have him come on and talk about these issues. He wrote an article that I want him to talk about. Cuba's basically twisting of the Christian message. But also I wanted him to come talk about how this is an issue that I believe is bewitching the American church. The idea that there's such a thing as a benevolent, all-encompassing state as a solution, and then worse, as a Christian solution. So I'm so privileged to have him on. Welcome, Yoey, to the program.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here.
No, it's my pleasure to have you. And when I first read your article, I told Julie, I said, Julie, we got to have him on. I really wanted to talk to you. I have really good friends from Cuba. And we were talking about the difference between Cuba and North Korea one time and things like that. And people here do not really appreciate, I don't think, the freedoms and that they really have. So my first question to you is, from your perspective, and you've experienced this this kind of socialist experience, why did you write this article?
Well, I've been covering in Cuba things like, as you mentioned before, freedom of expression, freedom of religion. Right. And I'm a Christian myself, my mother too, my best friends. And I have a passion, obviously, for the church, for what's happening with my community there. And I, as a journalist, was very interested reporting on these issues, not only those issues that are in the history books, like the concentration camps in the 60s for Christians in Cuba, but right. Also those things that are happening now, you know, the regime destroying temples, the regime imprisoning pastors like Lorenzo Rosales Fajardo in the oriental part of the island. And those things are a passion for me. And I'm very concerned that in the West, not many people know about that. Sure. And even some countries are taking the path of Cuba, the socialist path. And I'm really worried about that. Now I'm living here with my family, my wife and my kid in the U.S., in Ohio, amazing state, beautiful country. But I'm worried also because I'm seeing some things that is a glitch in politics that reminds me a little bit of what's happening in Cuba, sadly.
Well, and in your article, that's what I loved about what you said, is that the church has a role to play, even in society, whether people join our church or not, because the gospel is obviously an offer of grace, and there will be people who reject that offer. But the church still has a role to play in the civilizing of society. So you talked about how we have a role to play to be the conscience in our time and in our culture, and even the protector and promoter of freedom. So again, let me ask you this. I think I know the answer to why our kids or our young people are more swayed by this, but why does socialism and communism, which doesn't enhance this, why are we so susceptible? Why do you think our young people are like, that just sounds so beautiful, when it really isn't, right?
I think because it promotes the idea of adventure, a poetic idea, and, but really bad ideas have to be really well wrapped, in right. a shiny vocabulary, in a shiny way, in a glittering way. And when people buy that, like in my country, sadly, a couple of generations before me, they thought they were buying justice and they were buying truth truth with
Right.
capital T, you know, or
Right.
they were buying equality, whatever. And what we found in Cuba, I came from the future, I can tell you. In Cuba, what we found is a small percentage of the population, the socialists, taking everything, and a big percentage of the population, like me, my family, other Christians, other people that doesn't have any religion, the religious belief in Cuba, but that are decent and they are opposed to socialism. Those people have nothing now, and we didn't find justice. We found a lot of injustice. We didn't found freedom. We found even coercion for you to speak, for when you are trying to speak publicly about your ideas of what should be your country, your own country, the land where you and your ancestors lived. And it's really sad because socialism ultimately, what it does, and it's part of the article that I wrote, what it do is to try to overthrow those symbols, those ideas that has built the West. And Christianity is at the center, is the core of those ideas, in order to put in power a man, an ideology, a belief that, you know, men with the limited reason that we have as men are good enough to conduct the whole nation, the life of millions of people, you know, not the wisdom of the ages.
Well, you know, you just said it. I mean, thou shalt not steal. You know, when people say there should be no private property, well, then no, the Bible says no. You can. God's going to give everyone different gifts, and you shouldn't be a kind of person who steals it or covers it or anything like that. Well, thou shalt not steal unless the government takes it all. And that's what you start to find in socialism. The government takes it all, and you wind up keeping the poor even poorer. You know, it's interesting. The reason I got into this discussion of why I really wanted to have you on is because I've been in urban ministry all my life, and there's a lot of liberation theology even in our urban centers in America. Even in the Midwest, the cities are fraught with this. And what I found out about liberation theology, which literally makes the gospel of Jesus a political thing, it doesn't liberate anybody. It keeps the poor, it keeps the politicians rich, and it does it all on the backs of working people. And I think that's what you saw in Cuba. In our country, we still have places people can go to get away from that. Talk about your experience there even more specifically, because once that freedom is taken away, it becomes a brutal place to live, right?
Yes, definitely. The liberation theology has a big headquarters in, let's say, Cuba is a big headquarters for liberation theology in the region, theologians. And obviously what happened in Cuba is not a good thing. You had an economy, for instance, in the 50s, in the late 50s, that competed with the economy of Spain and Italy. And now you have a destroyed economy. A big percentage of the population, the Cuban population, just going into the Caribbean Sea, trying to reach Florida or Mexico even. You know, you have a big diaspora. You have a huge exile of people just trying to find freedom in other countries. Even in Haiti, which is a country that has a lot of problems, there are big communities, Cuban communities. You don't have any Haitian community in Cuba, for instance. That image can speak a lot about what happened when you destroy the freedom in a country in the name of a good cause, no? A good cause, air quotations, the socialist cause. And as you mentioned, liberation theology is just a twist of Christianity, of the Christian spirit, in order to use it as a weapon for political purposes. And political purposes that are not in other direction than in a socialist direction. That's why you have For instance, also in pedagogy, pedagogy, you have Paulo Freire, the theoretical of pedagogy,
Right.
talking about this kind of ideas also in his field of knowledge, that man can substitute God, that man can do it with the limited knowledge that they have now. And that's frankly a thing that is coming since the 17th century, with all the or before even, but especially with the illustration and this idea that the men can reshape themselves. And now you have extreme visions of that, extreme outcomes of that with gender ideology, for instance.
Right. Well, so much of what you wrote in this article, even just what you said, when you take limited government protects individual freedom. The benevolent, all-encompassing government, actually in the hands of sinners, destroys it. And our founding fathers understood that. And that's why I loved what you said. You actually said it so clearly. You said the secular statist regime has to undermine freedom and self-governance by redefining the terms. And you said God now is the state. The Messiah is the fearless leader. Faith is not faith in Jesus and faith in the Scripture, but in the ideology, and that there's rituals, acts of revolutionary reaffirmations and celebrations, and I would even say abortion is probably part of that ritual too. And you talked about that, and we're starting to, and then you even said they talk about the government that produces joy. We just had a platform where they said we're the platform of joy. And that was so scary to read what you said and then to hear it happening in our culture. They change the meaning of words, and that actually takes freedom away, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely. And the thing is, the state should be an administrator for the country, for practical issues. But those issues that are enshrined in the hearts of the man should be part of these of a real liberty.
Matters of the heart are not for the state, right?
That's correct. That's what I'm trying to say, and you nail it. And the thing is, in Cuba, for instance, when you have the totalitarianism, the last totalitarian regime in the Western Hemisphere, you have the state owning every space in your personal or public life. For instance, when I was a journalist in Cuba, because I was doing journalism and talking about all these themes, torture, political prisoners, those things that the regime doesn't want anybody to know in the world, they tell me, we can take your son from you. And
Right.
that was really frightening, that's something that any man, any father wants for themselves or their families. And the thing is, that's part of the totalitarian state. And in our case in Cuba, socialism came first, and totalitarianism is like the natural second step in that political path.
Well, you are, by the way, you're doing phenomenally. Thank you. I can't tell you, your article is one of the best articles I've read on this, because the churches are being bewitched by this, and your article explained it so well, and you are too, and I'm glad that you came on. We're going to come back in just a minute to talk to Yoy Suarez, talking about Cuba's corrupt twist of Christianity and why it's a lesson that we need to learn here. Back in just a minute. I'm Greg Seltz. This is The Drive Home. And welcome back. I'm Greg Seltz. This is The Drive Home, and I'm speaking to Yoy Suarez, excuse me. And I just wanted to say, first of all, I apologize because I didn't I was asking him questions that just came off the top of my head, and instead of sticking to the article, which would have been much more fair to you, I just interviewed a friend from Finland. And as I was already, talking with him, he said, well, sorry if I didn't answer that correctly. I haven't spoken English, he said, for about 3 weeks. And I apologize because I forgot, I'm asking these questions like Spitfire. And so let's get back to your article, because there's so much potency in this article. It said, you talked about the new man, the Guevarian new man, and you said that if people believe in the old values, we get in the way. And that's what was happening, Che Guevara, and that kind of thing was happening in Cuba. And there's a lot of people wearing Che Guevara shirts in America today. And there's a foolishness to that, isn't there?
Yes, I think there is a big triumph of propaganda, lead by the Cuban regime, obviously, because Che Guevara is is a key figure of the Cuban socialist tyranny, but right. Also by the international left, and they are putting this man Che Guevara like a benevolent figure for right. The history of the world, and was someone who killed and destroyed in Africa and in South America and in the Caribbean area too, and was the man that was responsible for the destruction of the Cuban economy, the Cuban industry. Fidel Castro made him president of the Cuban bank, and that destroyed the Cuban economy. And now he is reverenced by this cultish culture of the left as someone who is worth of being remembered as a good man, And
right.
In Cuba, for instance, you have talking about rituals and that kind of stuff. In Cuba, every kid in the morning, they have to pledge allegiance to Che Guevara memory. Every morning in all the schools, is a centralized system. You don't have any private university or private Christian school or anything like that. Everything in the educational system is run by the government, and those kids are indoctrinated since they are really small and until they are pre-adolescents, pre-teenagers, in order to wash their minds and fix this idea in their head. Che Guevara is someone that you have to copy, that you have to see as a guidance for you. And that's part of the ritualistic ideals that the left in Cuba has built. And I think that in other parts of the world, too.
Well, and you also say totalitarianism is a twist of Christianity. Why? Because it conflates that religious idea of altruism. And you were talking about an author of Norberto Fuentes, and you talked about how he was pointing out that the Cuban Revolution tried to say that the state was altruistic, and that's a false thing too, right?
Yes, totally. I would say Satan doesn't have invented anything new.
Right.
He just tried to twist what God has made, and yes. This kind of rhetoric that the regime, the Cuban Revolution is magnanimous and is spreading. For instance, the Cuban regime is always talking about how they are spreading for the continent in Latin America teachers. The Cuban regime sent teachers to, Venezuela, Nicaragua, you name it. And the thing is that behind of that is not an altruistic sentiment. What they are trying to do is to indoctrinate all those populations that even in the end are voting for new dictators like Hugo Chavez or Ortega in Nicaragua. And Sandinism now and Chavism are part of the sons of Castroism, what we have in Cuba. Every three dictators, every three regime has something in common, have a socialist feeling in the base, have a socialist base to build all their ideology, all their system around the idea of equality and the justice of the man, and Marxism and all these roots in common. Yeah.
Well, final thought. I mean, warning to America, or actually maybe even say this, the call to the Christians in America. We can push back on this here. We can vote against this here, can't we?
Definitely. I think that the socialist regimes always had identified Christianity as a barrier, as an obstacle. And they're right, because we are willing to die in the circus, to die in the streets, like in Soviet Union. They just shot Christians, Jews, people that they hate because of their beliefs. It's interesting. One of the first acts that the Soviet Revolution did was to kill God. They shot fires to the sky, and they said, okay, now God is dead. It was a symbolic, obviously, thing, but it's interesting that the first enemy of these totalitarian regimes are Christians, are mainly Christianity, the idea of God, because they want to supplant that idea. And we know that the state is not God. The state is at least as a big state is not God. It's closer to the Satan idea, not to the close idea.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, because your words, when I said benevolent state is bewitching the church, because there is no such thing. When I read your article, I thought, my goodness, this is exactly what I've been talking about. And you said it so clearly and so specifically. So, folks, if you want to read that article, you can go to WashingtonStand.com, Cuba's Corrupt Twist of Christianity. But I thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us today. Yoey, this has been a real privilege to have you on. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Folks, in the face of the challenges, face them with courage and the wisdom of faith. So in closing, till we see him face to face, speak the truth in love with humility and grace, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Till next time, God richly bless you. I'm Greg Seltz.